Already have a podcast? It's time to join Spreaker's monetization program, the easiest way to profit from your passion starting on day one. You decide which episodes and exactly where you want the ads to be inserted, and Spreaker takes care of the rest. If you're not on Spreaker, it's easy to import your podcast in just a few clicks, and then you can monetize your older episodes too. For one free month on a pro account, visit Spreaker.com/monetize. That's SPREAKER.com/monetize to join and start making money today.
Welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK radio network. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and as always, we are joined by the stupendous Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello. How are we today?
Yeah, not too bad. Had a good day.
For businesses around the world, today isn't a restart, it's a rethink. That's why they're partnering with IBM. Retailers are keeping their systems up as millions of orders move online. Call centers are using IBM Watson to manage customer questions with AI. And solutions built on the IBM cloud are helping patients receive trusted information. Today, we're rethinking how business moves forwards. Let's put smart to work. Visit ibm.com/smart/UK to learn more.
Put my feet up, relaxed, chilled.
Another day of relaxing and chilling.
Well, I thought I'd give myself a day off. You know.
Another day off?
No, to be fair, actually, I did write a blog as well.
You did? You did write a blog. I'm in the middle of writing a blog too. He's cracking the whip, everybody.
That blog will be up. That blog will be up on Friday.
Where will it be, Paul?
Sorry?
Where will it be?
Well, yeah, where can you find us?
Oh, it will be on our website,
which
paranormalconcept.com.
Ah, yeah, that's all of us testing.
Yeah. Turn the tables on him this week.
Considering I made the thing, you know.
Right, shall we get into the show, guys?
Well, why not?
Yeah, well, I thought I'd take the lead today. As I've actually invited a guest on. It was my turn, so I sort of trawled around. But I actually thought we would sort of like look into investigations and stuff. And I thought, what can I actually sort of do and get someone on to sort of like talk about investigations and stuff. And one of our followers actually sort of who we sort of get in contact with on a sort of ad hoc basis, you know, sort of... I actually found out that he's a MUFON investigator plus an ex-police officer. So I thought, what better person to get on? So I would like to welcome onto the show Mr. Chris, and I've forgotten how to pronounce your surname.
That's all right. It's Chris De Marais.
Oh, and hello, Chris, and welcome to the show.
I appreciate you, your offer to have me on. It's a pleasure.
That's great. As I said in your brief introduction, you say you are sort of like a retired, I believe, New York City police officer?
Yonkers, the city that adjoins the Bronx, the borough of New York City.
Oh, right. Oh, I see. Yeah, we've heard of the Bronx this ends. So, yeah, we've got a rough idea of where you're at. And I understand now you're actually retired and you live down in South Carolina, I believe.
Yeah, so when I was approaching my retirement age, 20 years, there's no particular age, I started to look for a place I wanted to raise my children in a better environment than they were at. And so I purchased a house in South Carolina. I'm about 3 miles from Georgia, maybe 15 miles from North Carolina. And I had custody of my children. So my two oldest were going into just going into high school. My little one was only about 4 years old. And so I had him in private schools in New York because when my son wanted to go to the public school, I couldn't send my girls to the public schools there, where I was at anyway. Mm-hmm. So I moved where it was more conducive to the way I wanted to raise my children. It was the best move I ever made. In hindsight, I was hoping for the best, and I got more than I anticipated out of it. It just, my son, he just bloomed when he came down here. It was a tremendous. He just changed tremendously, the way he approached school and other things. And my oldest daughter was never an issue with that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And my little one, she just was so small, she didn't know the difference. So, and I just came down and I had gotten my teacher's license in New York after I got my master's degree. And I thought I'd teach down here, but there's no reciprocity from this state anyway. So I just volunteered for different organizations. I volunteered at the school. I also substitute taught, and I joined the State Guard, which is it's like your territorials, but it's a unit. It's a volunteer auxiliary unit attached to the National Guard, and we go on disaster relief efforts. We guard different functions for politicians, for if there's an organization having a function, they need, security. And I was appointed to the state constabulary, which is, it's law enforcement down here, but it's volunteer also, but it's a state police position. But I can go and I can volunteer for any agency I want. I can volunteer at the schools to do security. And it's just, it's a change in lifestyle, but it fits me, and I'm not married to any specific time, any specific task. I can do what I want. I can go on, if my kids will watch my dogs for me, I can leave and go on vacation for a little bit, go to different places I've never been, and it works out pretty well for me.
That's great.
Sounds good. Mm-hmm. Listening to your back history, you've got a lot of critical thinking jobs in there, where you have to weigh up evidence, where you're looking at a situation and you're looking at it in a very critical minded way of thinking, very logical, very rational way.
Yeah, that's one of the issues early on when I started to investigate for MUFON, talking to people that investigate with MUFON. You have and I think it's one of the problems with MUFON is that you have a lot of people on the fringe now that they allow to speak, they allow in to get their fingers into this organization, and they accept everything on the face of it. You have people that make these, they have these obscure theories, and they make these outrageous claims, and they don't provide an ounce of evidence to show that there's even a remote possibility that what they're saying is true. Whereas in law enforcement, you're trained to go out and search for that. So you get somebody that's going to complain to you that an incident occurred, but your job is to then find out what were the pieces to that incident. And then it doesn't always work to your satisfaction, but at least that's what you do. So as a police officer, you want to make sure that if you're going to file a complaint against someone or arrest someone, you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing by the victim, by the person that's being arrested. You want to make sure that you're not creating a situation where you're wrong, and I think that's what's I'm sure you have it in your field also in the paranormal, but that's what you find in the UFO, the EBE field, is that you have these people that make these claims, and it scares people away that would otherwise be interested in engaging in that kind of study. So it's the way I approach it. I don't accept everything people say. I want to know a little bit more about it before I'm willing to take that next step.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. I mean, I did have a passing interest in ufology a few years ago, but I sort of drifted away from it as such because, as you alighted to there, it seems to have been sort of hijacked or sort of taken over by the fringe. and sort of, with people with sort of more outrageous sorts of claims, which on face value, and when you're presented with them, you think, come on, this can't be right, and how do you go about sort of ascertaining what is sort of is worth following up on or discard, and is that and do you come to that conclusion quite early on when you are presented with a case?
So with MUFON, what they do is, I'm in the state of South Carolina, so it's the South Carolina chapter of MUFON, and we have field investigators, and there are members, but they're field investigators also that you'll receive a I'm not going to say it's a complaint, but it's a witness. A witness says that they observed an object or a humanoid or whatever it is that they're claiming to have seen, and so I'll get an email from the state director of South Carolina, and she'll send it to me and say, hey, I have this report. Look at it. If you want to take it, let me know, and it's yours. So you can go back into this. MUFON has a system called the Case Management System. They call it CMS, and it contains, I believe, from 1996 forward. They have other cases way prior to that in what's called a Pandora, but they haven't. They're paper, so they haven't downloaded them into the system yet. So you have to request all that, which is another obstacle with them. So you look at the case and then you decide. Generally, I just take them because it's not like you're getting a tremendous amount. It's not like California or Florida where you're getting hundreds and hundreds. You may get 40, 50 a month sometimes. And then what I do is I reach out to the person who made the witness report, and they're required to leave at least an email to verify or a phone number, and I email them and I tell them who I am. Just briefly, I say, my name is Chris De Marais. I'm a field investigator and upstate section director for MUFON in South Carolina. I've been assigned your case, and I'd like to speak to you about it to get a better understanding of what you claim to have seen, and I need more information to complete the report that I need for the system. As a general rule of thumb, if these people don't get back to you within a couple of days, that's a red flag right away. So then you reach out again and maybe email them again. Then maybe you try to cold call them. And once that takes place, then you kind of figure, well, there's something not right here. And then you go into, what I like to do is just go into website. I cut and paste their parts of their synopsis narratives and see sometimes things come up from 50 years ago. Someone will claim in Brazil to have seen a UFO, and these people have completely plagiarized this witness statement from years ago, and then they try to re-report it, through MUFON, and that's just a keystroke hoax. And then some people will submit photographs, and you ask them for, can I have it off your phone or the camera you took? And sometimes they'll give it, and then you can go into the device and then find out what type of camera it was, what lens it was, what speed, whatever, and it at least justify that piece of evidence that they actually took it. Others will say, well, I don't have it, it's a screenshot, and it's just, so you just add these little pieces of the puzzle up. And I would say, on average, about 80% of all reports that come in are explainable in one way or another. They're natural phenomenon, they're misidentified aircraft, celestial objects, cloud formations, and things like. I've even had them where people have been taking pictures in the back of their yards and their farms, and they've had something in their that looks like an object, flying past their phone or camera or whatever, and it's it's just it's a leaf, or if you check on it a little more, it's a bug or a butterfly, but they think that they're seeing something, but it's not what and they're pretty receptive to being told. I've also had people that get really angry when you tell them that, the light you filmed at night is it's an optic trick. It's probably a light from off to the side of the house that's reflecting off your phone, and no, it's not. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, well, I don't know what I'm talking about. So, and then I've had people that straight up hoax, and they'll send me pictures, and then what happens is when I call them, they have my cell phone number. You see, and that's I'm a man, I'm 6'1", 230 pounds. I don't really care if they have my number. They're not gonna do anything to me. But some of these other people, they get kind of nervous. I've had people text me at 12 o'clock at night, hey man, I got some more stuff. I got pictures. I got other things. And you have to finally tell them, hey, you got to back off. And, so there's a lot of other issues going on with some people. You talk to them, you find out, you ask them, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm aviation. I work at an airport, or I'm a nurse or a teacher. And then you get somebody who'll say, well, I hurt my back a year ago, and I'm 42 years old, and I live in my mom's basement, and it's a red flag. I'm sorry, but that's, what are you doing up at 3 o'clock in the morning looking at the sky? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to. It's just the
ufology world does, and I say this very respectfully, does seem to attract a lot more batshit crazy people than the paranormal. I mean, the paranormal's bad enough, but the ufology world does seem to attract that kind of person more. Why do you think that is?
Well, because I think I can go back to my first statement, and that's because MUFON and other organizations, I would say over the last 10, 20 years, and I may get in trouble for this, and I don't really care, but they've allowed other fringe organizations, they've allowed people with these fringe ideas, these outrageous ideas, to come in and speak at their conferences, to speak at their symposiums, to post things. You have these people that come in, like secret space program people that claim that they go to Mars and they fight reptilians around Mars, and just these, and they put forth these people as legit researchers, investigators, part of this this UFO family. And so you get people that want to believe that, they so want to believe it that it's, what it is. The bottom line is these people take advantage of gullible, and it's a way for them to generate money and generate income. And as long as they can do it, they just keep doing it. But I've had experiences where I've been at conferences where these younger people who they're trying to invite in, and they'll be young kids, in their late teens, and they'll hear these people talk, and they've gotten up at a question and answer, and they've asked, how can you guys take this stuff serious? I mean, I want to join and I want to contribute, but I hear this stuff, and how am I going to take anything that's said serious when I mean, it's just, I could give you examples and cite things, but it attracts them because they allow it, I think, is the bottom line.
Yeah, and I suppose because I understand you have quite a big conference circuit in the United States. I mean, you can, and if you get on one of these circuits as a speaker, I mean, you can actually make quite a sort of nice little income through it, can't you?
Well, that's the way that they structure the conferences, and MUFON's not the only one. You have UFO Congress, you have other ones, and I know people from out in Phoenix. They have a huge Phoenix group, and they legitimately have they put on an awesome presentation when they have guest speakers. They come in and they let them speak, and they're just straight down the middle. This is what our investigations into the phenomenon. But sometimes, and I think what the problem is that the age group for MUFON is getting so much older now, and they're not able to bring the young kids in to replenish the organization. And so they're trying to offer up more fantastical stuff, I think, almost to keep up with what's going on in media and movies. And I think that's what's going on. I don't know if it's intentional. I think it's just a byproduct of their non-ability to replenish the organization. And
so, yeah, would it be fair to say you think it's been driven more now by popular culture as opposed to sort of like the more traditional sort of way it was approached?
Yes, and that's my opinion, and I know I'm not alone in that opinion. And so I know that there are people that are trying to create ways to entice younger people. And now I could tell you from experience, it's very hard, and my oldest daughter, she's going to be 30 years old in 6 months. And she works 2 jobs. She's a counselor. She's a parole officer. She has other things. She's getting married in March. She has other things going on. She enjoys the genre of it, but she can't really get involved. My little one, she's 20. She's a junior in college, and I've had her come to try to help me at a couple of I run meetings in the upstate at a library in Easley, South Carolina, and she came a few times, helped me set up and helped me with a few things, and she brought a few friends, and I tried to reach out to Clemson University to get with the deans. I wrote them letters and letters and letters, and I say, hey, listen, I just want to try to get some young people involved, especially the people in the colleges of sciences and philosophies. Try to get them involved. No answer, or the kids just laugh at it, and they think it's the little green men, and it doesn't help when people talk about having hybrid babies and little octopus men. It just doesn't help. You know what I mean? It doesn't help. So I don't know if there's an answer to it. Maybe someone will figure it out one day. I know I've tried, and I'll continue. It's just not a good time with the COVID, but once it subsides a little bit, I think I'm gonna try a different approach to it. I think
try and carry on the good fight, are you?
Yeah. So I think really it would be interesting to get a chapter like no other MUFON chapter and state chapter has, as far as I know from talking to other directors, it has had a college or university type group. So I think it would be awesome to be able to get, especially at Clemson University. I mean, to get students from all areas of study, physics and geology and environmental sciences and philosophy, and get them together and just propose, hey, what would it take for an alien to live on the third planet of Gliese star system, and what could be the chemistry? What might be, maybe they're not carbon-based creatures. Maybe there's something else. What would it take to create a propulsion system to move, like you and I had talked about, Richard, a nuts and bolts thing.
Yeah.
I move away from that anymore to get them to understand multiverse theory, and to that's kind of, they have to be able to expand their minds and expand the way they think, because it's not everybody can grasp that concept. It's not an easy one to explain. You have to be able to imagine that. And
yeah, I can actually see your point. I mean, the default position sort of most people will go to is nuts and bolts UFOs. Mm-hmm. I mean, the very term UFO has been so distorted, it does that. And that's literally what it means, isn't it? People from other planets in craft that visit us.
So, right. And that was coined, there's a certain group of people complaining about, I'm sure you guys have heard through the, through news and the military here in the United States, through the Pentagon, they put forth this task force to study, they call it UAP, unknown aerial phenomenon. And people in the UFO field, they're chastising for you. How dare you use that name? It's just a phenomenon. They've been using that name since 1947, when Project Sign, which was one of the predecessors to Project Blue Book. That's what the military calls it. Bottom line is, like you said, it's a UFO. It's an UAV, unknown aerial vehicle. It's a UFO. It just means that I don't know what that thing is. I don't know if it's from another planet. I don't know if it's being flown by creatures from another planet. I don't know. I just don't know what it is. And and sometimes people they tend to stray away from that, especially when they have these conferences where they get these guests that talk about these way out things.
The tentacle men.
Yeah, well, that's what happened. Just briefly, I was at a panel discussion, and there was a young girl there, and you know, he had guys. I'm 55. There were people there that was 20 years older than me, wearing Vietnam vet caps, and you know, and there were men and women all over. And this girl, she was probably 20, 21, and she was sitting a few rows ahead of me, and the panel was talking about abduction phenomenon, which I'm not a proponent of abduction phenomenon, but for my own reasons, but I'm willing to listen and hear what people have to say. So we were sitting there, and they were talking about abduction phenomenon, and she raised her hand to ask a question, and they said, "Oh, what's your question?" And she said, I just was introduced to my 13th hybrid octopus child from whatever people she claimed. You could hear a pin drop in that little amphitheater, because you have people looking at each other. At first, is she being serious, or is she trying to draw a reaction from people, or does she honestly think that this took place? Is there an issue, an underlying issue to her that you know? I hate to say, is she emotionally challenged? I don't know, but it's a logical question to ask if somebody presents that as a serious, offers that up as a serious, piece of fact. And so I don't know.
Or she really experienced it.
Or she could have.
Or she really could have, because, you know, we only have... And this is the problem, though, isn't it? This is the problem with any kind of situation you come across. There is no physical proof.
No, there's not. And that's the one of the overwhelming problems with it, is that even in the act, well, people say everybody carries a camera because they have a cell phone. They should be able to take pictures. It's the same with Bigfoot and all these other cryptid people. You know, they want to present it as as fact. But the bottom line is there's no compelling evidence. Going back to your original question with, you know, being a police officer, that's what you need. You need that physical evidence. You need those facts. Whatever it is, you need that to reasonably conclude that someone committed a crime, and because you're going to take their freedom away from them. In this instance, really nobody's a victim except for the people that are paying money to buy these things or to listen to people speak. You still want a component of the truth. And when you delve in a little deeper, even on the face of it, there are a couple of people out. I don't know if you ever heard of Lou Alessandro, who does this program on History Channel about UFOs. He's supposedly worked for an agency in the Army that investigated them. And, you know, he doesn't provide any proof that he even worked there. He doesn't provide any proof of what he's saying. And people get pushed off by that. So,
And I think that the physical proof is needed in this field, and in any field in the paranormal umbrella term, the crypto world and the ufology world. We should have found some compelling proof of evidence up to now. Now, some people would argue that we have found that.
Some have. I mean, even if you go back to Roswell in 47, but even then, you're talking about something that, you know, kind of grew legs over time. What started out as a benign kind of radio program with the military going and investigating, what they concluded was a research balloon, which I don't buy that. I don't buy that either. But they haven't come forth with any evidence to prove that this crash even took place. And everybody's long gone that they can't, you know, who would have corroborated the evidence anyway. But
so how difficult is it then when you do get a case that you know, sorting out the wheat from the chaff, as it were? So you get a witness statement come through and you have to go and investigate that. How often is there a situation where you think, oh, I can go and see if there's physical evidence here? How often does that happen?
So that doesn't take place very often. The physical evidence. I know of cases here where people have offered physical evidence, and it's either tainted or it's rained and you can't go down and see it. We even had a case where it was a multiple abduction case, and the individual was offered reverse hypnosis at, I believe it was the person that does it is in Georgia, if they still do it there. And they after many attempts at getting this person to go, they refused. But I've heard of people speak in the field of investigation saying, well, you get a report, you go, they want you to assemble a kit so you have it available with you at your house, and you would leave with this kit and go if somebody said, well, a craft landed in my backyard, or somebody disembarked from the vehicle, and you can go there and collect sample A, B, and C and do whatever. And I could tell you, and this was my major issue with this person, was that if there was a craft that was visible to you and I that landed in somebody's yard, the first people that would get a call on that would be the police, and they would get there and they would shut that site down completely until, and I would assume that if anything entered our airspace, I mean, the military, some government would be on top of that almost immediately. So to be able to get to any kind of physical evidence would have to be done later on, and it would have to be done through kind of a backdoor way. And I how long are you talking for that to happen? Days later, maybe weeks later, where you can go in and get physical samples, soil samples, grass samples, whatever it is that you can obtain. It's really tough. And there are so many legal issues when it comes to it too. There's ownership of the property. You have to have people sign waivers for the property you're taking, for the samples you're taking. There has to be a chain of evidence. So it's not as simple as just going down with an empty mayonnaise jar and putting stuff in it and leaving. You have a bunch of forms you have to have them fill out. You have to have secure bags. You all this stuff you need to purchase on your own. You have to purchase evidence bags, close them, mark them. And a lot of people in this field don't know how to do that. See, I did that for 20 years. So to me, it's second nature, but it's so easy to foul and taint that kind of material up anyway. I don't know. I kind of hope for all. You hope one day, you'll get a case where, hey, it's right in front of you, and you guys have to get it too. In the field you guys study, it's got to be highly frustrating to know that something's not right, but there's nothing cementing it all together yet.
Oh yeah, we totally get that.
Yeah, because we often sort of just leave people who sort of tend to come to it because, well, it's a personal experience,
Right.
That, and that's all it is, and all it really can be, can't it? Until something material and solid turns up. Yeah,
that's really the bottom line, is that you and I and everybody else can theorize whatever we want, and we can suppose and we can guess, but until there's something in front of you where you can positively identify it as something off-world or something interdimensional or something that's coming here, it's hard to convince yourself, let alone convincing a mass of people that this exists. And I don't discount that there are things going on. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't believe that. But the origins and the identity and everything else, that's highly debatable. And if someone has it, the only people that have it right now are the military and the governments. I know England and the United States have, because of their relationship, especially prior to World War II, but even before World War II, if you go back to the late 1800s into World War I, there's been an exchange of things related to this field between the two countries for a long time. And because they have the military bases and the research facilities, the chemical plants, the avionics industry, it's all circumstantial, but it all kind of adds up to something. They know something's going on, whether they're willing to say what it is. If it's them developing weapons that they don't want to give away the secrets to other belligerents, I don't know. Or do they think that people will get scared if you tell them what these things are and where they're coming from? I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a foreseeable problem. If that's the case, and this stuff has been going on this long, well, nothing's happened. You know, these beings have never taken an aggressive action against anyone on this planet. So I don't know. It's just figuring out an angle, really.
So, have you ever had a personal experience yourself in this way?
So, my mom's parents were from Italy, and when they came from Italy, they emigrated to Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania. Up in there's a big lake, Lake of Wallenpaupack, and my three great aunts. My grandma died when she was very young. Obviously, I didn't know her, and so my three great aunts were like my grandma. We used to go see them a lot. You know, at the time it was a travel, but we used to go see them. My one aunt, she was well ahead of her time. She was in the paranormal field and the study of UFOs, and I mean just kind of really weird stuff. But she, when I was very young, would leave her books out. We'd talk. I was hooked, you know, especially being 7 or 8 years old, and I'd read her magazines, you know, and read her books, and she would take me out on sky watches out in the yard and tell me. She would give me binoculars and tell me to look up at a certain area, and you know, sure enough, there'd be a cigar-shaped craft with 3 lights in it, just hovering there, and then another one would be a disc-shaped object with a couple of green lights in it. And I'd ask her, "What are they?" And she said, "I've asked, and they don't deny they're there, but they claim not to." My sister and my cousin found a charred, 10-foot in diameter, charred to the ground there was a huge blueberry bush in the back that we used to, when we were kids, pick blueberries, and my aunt would make cream, and it was gone. There was a humming noise at night. They went out in the morning to get blueberries. They came back white as a ghost. And what's the matter? Well, there's a hole 10 feet burnt. There's nothing there. It's burnt to the dirt. Who knows what it was? And then one night we had the same experience. We wanted to go into the woods, and my aunt got very upset, so we didn't go in. It was a humming sound. And what is it? She said, "I don't know what it is. I just know that the next day, I'm glad that I wasn't in there when it happened." And I guess it was 1986. It was about the time I was a police officer. I'd just gotten on, and a group of friends and I were hanging out just outside of Yonkers, and at a place called Point Street. And it was about 2:00 in the morning. And it was about 6 of us, and over the MTA line, we saw these lights coming very slowly. And as it came approaching south, the object just started to get large. But it appeared at first just to be lights. When it got closer, you could see it became a triangular shape, and it was solid, huge. It was so surreal. It seemed so close that you could touch it. I would say it had to have been 400 feet on each edge, and it was dead silent. We turned our radios off in our car. We just stood there and watched it, and it just floated very slowly above the train tracks down into New York City, and it was huge. And we learned later what they called it, because there had been some chases up in Yorktown, which is it's in upstate, up county, Westchester County, and police officers were chasing this object for a period of 2 days, you know, and they captured it on video and on the Motorola tapes. And so, you know, and the Hudson River Triangle phenomenon is a well-known phenomenon for that area of outside New York City. So I'm not sure.
Paul, did you want to pop in there?
I'm quite intrigued by it all, and I actually done some research on the MUFON website today on history. How did you get into it? I mean, from what I can gather, the MUFON is basically that they wanted to correlate as many reports as they can to try and find out what's going on. So how did you get to be involved with the MUFON, and how did you become an investigator for them?
So I think it was maybe 2013. I was online. Somehow or some way I came across I didn't really know anything about MUFON at that time. And I came across an article saying that they had having a symposium. And so I couldn't make that. Well, I couldn't really do much back then anyway because I had my daughter was so young, but I took that and I looked into it and I read about MUFON and I joined. And then I had some things going on at the time, but I called the state director and I asked her about being a field investigator. I told her who I was, what I did, and her name is Cheryl. She's awesome, and she's like, well, why don't you take the test? And it takes a while. So you have to devote pretty much a full day to the exam, and you get the manual, you read it, and then you take the exam, and then you pass it. They appoint you a field investigator, and then they start to, offer you these cases that they receive. And I don't know. I think I was always looking for an outlet for this because like I said, I've always been interested in it since I've been a kid, and it just kind of fit at this point in my life because I do have extra time. I have a website. I should keep up with it more, but I have other things to do sometimes, and then I always put things on the back burner. I was writing a book on my son's life. I was writing a book, and then I have a little blog on my website, and I do the Facebook, and so it kind of just it keeps the dryness out of it. As long as you start researching different things and looking into, it just seemed to be a logical thing for me to do, given my, that I was a cop and I liked to investigate, and it just seemed like a natural fit to do something that included that type of investigation mentality.
Have you looked into other, like the big cases, like for example the Travis Walton case?
Yeah, well, I met him a few times and spoke to him. He's easy to speak. He's easy to speak with, and he's very engaging. I think his story, the crux of his stories always remain the same. But I think over time it's kind of morphed. He's added little bits and pieces as time's gone along. So you don't know. You have to. I don't know. You take what truth is from 40 years ago, and you kind of just. I think that's what you base his story on. Anything recent, I think, is more fluffing his story.
So, are you able to access like the original transcripts and interviews he did from any case, going back in time? Can you access that through MUFON?
I can get anything I want, yeah, because I'm a field investigator. Well, I'm a state section director also, so I can get any report I want. There's 100, I think, to date, since 1996, the ones they have in the system, I think there's 150,000 cases that have been logged into that CMS system. Then there's a bunch that were from, I'm going to say whatever prior to that time, maybe 1940s on. They have paper reports that if they give them out, they redact them. They do whatever they do with them. They don't have the manpower yet to log them all into the system. So you have to request through them for that report. But I can go back in. I could put in a date, time. I could put in a location. I could put in. It's all cross-referenced. Craft type, craft size, lights, distance from the observer, longitude, latitude, weather conditions. It's all cross-referenced. There's multiple amounts.
The problem with those kind of pieces of data that's required, it's very hard for a layman. Like, if I had an experience, I wouldn't have a clue how far away it was, where it was on the right. You know what I mean? I literally wouldn't be able to tell you that kind of information. And that's, I would say, for the general populace. You wouldn't be able to go. I don't know. It's just that kind of data that's needed to build up a proper picture of this. Is not. It's guesswork, isn't it? It's guesstimates.
Yeah, I agree. A large part of it is definitely when you get a report and on the face of it, it's just an object in the sky. So a red disc at 10 o'clock at night. Just to the right side of the moon. well, then you get in contact with this person, and you ask. I always keep notes as I tell them before I start. I say, listen, I'm going to be listening, but I'm just going to be writing this stuff down. So, in case it gets quiet, I'm writing it down. And so once they're done, so the thing is, to do this properly, you just have to ask them what they saw. And the problem is you get people that aren't used to that type of interview, and they'll lead them on. So what did the disc, what color was that disc that you saw? Did you see any aliens on it? Was there any gas coming out of it? No, let them tell you what it is that they saw. Hey, what did you see? Just start from the beginning and tell me what you saw. Then when you let them tell their story, then you go back and you kind of ask them. So if you were looking at the moon and it was to the right, if you held an object in your fingers up to the sky, would a dime cover it? Would a quarter have covered it? Would a ping pong ball have covered it? Try to get, and they might say, I don't really know, or they're, like you said, they're just flat out just estimating at this point. How far up in the sky was it? And they'll say, well, what do you mean? And you say, well, just stand up, look outside, and stick your arm straight out. That's 45-degree angle. And raise your arm up as high as you think it was in the sky. And then they'll tell you, well, it's probably halfway up. So you just estimate how far it was up, between 45 and 90. And then you want to get a precise location, or as precise as you can from them. And then that's another problem you run into with people, is they won't divulge their original sighting locations that accurately. So you're guessing where they were, because then if you don't know where they were or what time of the day it was precisely, what you need to know what celestial objects were in the sky. You need to know where the moon was, where there's comet activity, where there's satellites coming by. This whole new starlight satellite thing has been creating a tremendous amount of problems, because people see these things streaking across the sky and they're reporting UFOs.
I was actually going to ask you that, if you had an influx since that thing has been going on in the sky.
Yeah. The MUFON had to finally put a disclaimer on on one of their pages saying, this is what it looks like. If you see this around 10 o'clock at night in your given location, this is probably what you're seeing. And it pretty much put a halt to it. But people were reporting them all the time.
Mad, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's almost like by getting the angles and the distance, you can then calculate literally how far away and how high it was and stuff like that, can't you?
So what happens is then you find out if there are any airports in the area, small airports in particular, because the government leases a lot of these smaller airports to run their prototype aircraft. People don't realize that. So what looks like an aircraft to you and I might not be necessarily what they have in development. And so people see these objects and it's right away it's a UFO, but it's very well might not be. So you ascertain whether there are airports in the area, water especially. A great percentage of UFO sightings are seen around water, around shorelines, lakes, deep lakes, reservoirs. So you want to ascertain how far were you from a lake, and then they'll tell you what the lake is. How deep was it? Sometimes they know how deep it was. It was 600 feet. It was 200 feet. Well, that's kind of important, And so these are the type of things that, and the more information you can get from them, then it helps. Then you can go back on NASA's website and see where the satellites were at 10 o'clock on September 1st at, in that longitude, latitude area. And you can come up, well, they just saw a satellite, or celestial objects in the area that might bounce off their optics, that they don't see it, but it's there, and so you could kind of pretty much come to a conclusion like that. And as I said before, there are people that get very angry at your conclusion. You don't know what you're talking about, and man, I'm just telling you I'm just going by the information you told me. That's the conclusion that I'm coming to. Is just a naturally occurring phenomenon. It's not a UFO.
Well, we are very similar in the paranormal for things that have been investigated and debunked, and you try and give a rational explanation, and people just won't accept it. They want to accept it that it's paranormal. That's up to them. Do you know what I mean? It's
all to the worst.
yeah.
But there is a great sort of temptation in this sort of field, sort of both sides. It can tend to be taken over by the believers sort of producing their narrative for the believers. So, and that cuts a lot of avenues of research off, surely.
Yeah, well, it's. I think it's worsened by things like Facebook, and because what they do is they create these groups, these UFO and these paranormal groups, and I went on to a paranormal group a few years ago with a friend of mine just to see what people were talking about, and they would have a person that would post a picture on, and it an obvious doctored photograph. And you would think that the reaction for people would be to laugh, oh man, it's pretty silly. But you had people that were speaking about, I see 3 dead people in the photograph that, you should get your family out of the house. It's a very dangerous situation. And so
Hashtag it's a demon.
Yes, yeah. And these people, and you're thinking to yourself, these people are already, I think it's just a mess. You're getting people that are honestly scared, honestly nervous, and then you have other individuals who go and they, to warn people to get out of the house. Your family, you're in great danger. And I mean, so in UFO field, you have that also. And I don't go on there. I'll go and see some of the MUFON groups I belong to, because we cross over, and I'll see what they post in their area, and I'll share if I think it's interesting and other. But even inside of some of those groups themselves, you get them. They post these things that are just obviously not what they're purporting them to be. And then when you say it, it's my opinion. I don't ever tell anybody they're wrong, and I don't ever put anybody down. I don't ever attack anybody personally. But you'll say that's been proven to be a hoax or CGI or whatever. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, whatever. That's on you, man. You know what I mean? But
yeah, it's like people, they want to believe it, don't they? They're desperate to believe it and present, and anything they come up with, they want, and it's human nature. I suppose you want to show people what you found and stuff, and you want them to believe it as well.
Right, and then. You think about the alternatives to it. It's so if hey, there are people out there that just want to make money off anything, and it's whether it's criminality, open, blatant criminality that I dealt with, or in this field now where people are making money through writing books, through go out in public speaking, and and I don't know if I take offense to it because it doesn't really have any effect on me personally. It doesn't show on me personally, but I feel bad for the people that are gullible enough to be sucked into it, and then to pay good hard earned money, and to just it's like, what do you not see? Like how is that person convincing? But when I try to give you an honest assessment of it, I'm wrong. And so, well, go ahead and do what you want. It's your money. But it muddies the waters. It really does.
So where do you get to then when you got to separate the wheat from the chaff? And so how do you do that? How do you actually look at somebody's account and go, I think that's more credible than that?
You mean when on a social media type setting?
No, I mean in a real setting. How do you? If you get a case, how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? Because it could sound totally bonkers. I'm sure the very first case of alien abduction, the Betty and Barney Hill, wasn't it? That was the first alien abduction scenario. When they first told their tale, they must be thinking, God, we must be sounding absolutely crazy here. But they still told their tale. They still felt compelled to tell their tale. Right. So something must have happened.
Right. Well, with the Betty and Barney Hill, they didn't actually know anything took place until well after that incident. They experienced time loss, but then it wasn't until regressive hypnosis much later that they started to purport these these interaction with these beings on these. And so I don't, my oldest, she has a master's degree in clinical psychology, and she teaches. She has a teaching license for psychology. And I asked her about that. I said, and she just looked at me. She said, "That is the most dangerous." She goes, "A lot of people won't even touch regressive hypnosis." She said, because it's so dangerous to the individual that puts themselves under to be subjected to that. She said, you can be the person, the hypnotist, and you can suggest anything you want to a person that's willing to undergo that procedure. She said it could be really, really dangerous. You could put thoughts into people's minds, believe, they could have experiences that they wind up believing that actually took place. I would say more person that just can't. I don't know, because in order to come to the conclusion that there are abductions or there are interaction with full-blown aliens, then the UAV part of it's moot. Do you know what I mean? If your objective is to go out and find out, well, there are objects in our solar system, there are objects in and around Earth. There's been objects that are been filmed or witnessed in our atmosphere. Well, and we're investigating that. We're trying to find out where they come from, what they are. You make that jump to now. I've been abducted by 3 different alien species. I've been on their craft. They've taken me to their planet of origin. They've showed me things, their technology. That's a huge leap, and so it makes the first step moot. You know what I mean? There would be no need for it. And I think if there was proof that that type of activity was going on, and I don't want to say this because I don't want to reflect on, I don't know if I even should say it, but I think sometimes there's underlying problems with people that start to claim those types of incidents took place. I think you need to go back further and find out who they are and what's going on before you can make any kind of judgment call on what they experienced. I really do think that that's what you have to do, because the average person, the rational person, the reasonable person doesn't make those statements, baseless statements, without offering something to prove what they're saying, versus just it being fantasy or flight of fancy or dream. A lot of people say that these things are recurrent dreams. Well, when did you find out you were abducted? I started dreaming about it. So you've never physically been on an aircraft or any type of, you've never physically touched these beings. They've never physically touched you. No, they come in dreams. They come in bits and pieces. And so I think that speaks for itself, kind of.
Well, that we know that there is an evolution between the old hag sleep paralysis and alien abduction. We can see that evolution through studies, from people, who have studied those kind of things. So there is an evolution of that. So whereas the fear back in the day would have been an old witchy hag that would come and, sit on your chest and paralyze you in your sort of like sleeping, waking kind of scenario, to now where we've got alien abduction scenarios going on, but it is actually a form of sleep paralysis, but that doesn't necessarily account for all of them. It counts for some of them, but not all of them. It's very, very difficult to, like you say, draw that line of where is the line of credibility, where is the line of truth there, or is there? And like you say, there are so many other factors that can be considered when you have to look at these kind of cases.
Right. And I'll, like I said before, I'm sure you guys see it in the paranormal also. You're making a claim that to the average person it's not a normal occurrence. It's not a normal thing to hear people make those claims. And the first, so you'd want to find out a little bit about the person beforehand. And I had one fella that he kept telling me that he would go out to his yard at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and he was taking photographs. And he would go back into his house, and the next morning, like maybe he'd go to sleep, and then he'd wake up later in the day. I'm going to look at the pictures I took. And he's claiming that these aliens were in these photographs, and he was sending me, oh my God, he must have sent me 100 photographs. And I have them on my computer. He sent so many of them on my phone. I just kept transferring to my computer. And so I just started to talk to him about, this is even before we got to the conclusion, and I was just asking him about his past. Where do you live? What do you do for work? Do you ask them if they're on medication? Well, at that point, when he's sending you all this stuff, then I think it's a pertinent question. Are you on any? Are you on? Well, I'm taking Percocets and I'm taking muscle relaxers and I'm doing okay, and so does that have anything to do with it? I don't know, but it's not a natural thing. These pictures were just, some of them, he was taking them off of his computer screen, and he wasn't framing them when he was sending them to me. Do you know what I mean? Some of them he didn't frame out. He didn't adjust them. So he was sending me these pictures claiming they were pictures from his backyard. And they were actually, he must have been going on the computer and just finding random pictures of stuff and snapshotting it off of his computer on his phone and then sending it to me. Do you know what I mean? So, they were of nothing anyway. So you could tell they were people with Twizzlers at night that were sparklers, and they were swinging them. And then it was just, do you know what I mean? It was just garbage. And
plus, that also sort of highlights that this individual has probably got some sort of compulsive sort of not disorder, but sort of, he's acting on some sort of compulsion, which is sort of quite a known sort of medical condition. He's obviously sort of latched on to like yourself, and think, oh great, somebody, and he's assumed, think, and this is an outlet I can sort of.
Yes.
I can send him.
I was his patsy. Yeah, you're 100% right. That's what, once I was accepting of, and I was willing to listen and willing to see what he had to offer. He thought he had me hooked. And that's the other thing, that there's people that see MUFON as a bunch of, just these gullible UFO alien people, and we're going to mess with them, and they think that you're on the face of everything just going to accept it, and so they just, that's the kind of stuff you don't get it all the time. Hoaxes are usually keystroke hoaxes where they make up a little story and send it in. You'll get some photographs that people will send in, but this was kind of rare because he became pretty aggressive about the whole thing.
And that must be a red flag as well. You're trying to reason with them, and if they sort of go off at you, you must think, hang on, this guy must have some sort of issue.
Yeah. Now, when my kids were small, I used to say to myself, if I ignore them, they'll go away. Well, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't work.
On that note, we are going to take a quick break, but join us after the break for this fascinating discussion on all things alien and UFO.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Now, before the break, we were looking at how we would take a case that may come to us in the ufology world, and break it down and find out whether or not it's credible or not. And we've kind of come to the conclusion that it's basically the same as the paranormal field. It is all based on theories and personal accounts, and it's very difficult to get anything concrete or physical evidence in regards to that. Now, Chris, I'd like to ask you about how, when you interview somebody, we've touched on it in the first half of the show. Now, these skills of interviewing somebody to get those details out, like you said before, you can't lead them, can you, when you're wanting that witness statement, whether or not it's a ghost statement or whether or not it's, a ufology case, whatever it is, you can't lead the witness. You have to let them tell it. What are the techniques that you can use to draw information out without leading them?
So what you should do is you should be prepared in the way of reviewing the whole case yourself, whatever is available. I mean, some of them are very, very brief. The synopsises are very brief. You read it so that you have a knowledge of it going in. And then what I do is I call them. They accept my invitation to call, and I'll call them up. Just, hey, this is Chris De Marais. I got your report, and I'd like to know more about it. Can you just do me a favor and start from the very beginning, and from prior to when what you were doing just prior to witnessing whatever you witnessed. So you want to go maybe back a little bit, a half hour, an hour. Were you outside? Were you inside? Find out where they were just prior to the incident occurring. And then you ask them to start from that point. Okay, why don't you start from that point? Just go slow and try to remember, all the little details you can, in conjunction with your sighting, whether you saw anything, whether you smelled anything, whether you heard anything. Do you have animals in the house? Did your animals react to anything? And then you let them speak. Some people will speak very freely without having to draw anything out of them. And then, of course, you have to go back and you ask them. So what I like to do is, and this is just the way I approach it. So when I was a cop, I would get people that would either give me, if it was a victim that I wasn't sure they were victimized the way that they say they were, or if it was a suspect that was under arrest that was going to offer a written statement to me in their defense or for whatever purposes it was, I'm going to ask them again. I'm going to ask them again in a different way to repeat what they told me. So if they tell me their story, I want to go back and I want them to repeat that whole story. I'm not going to ask them to start from the beginning, but I'm going to ask them questions that will lead me to those points. I might not do it in succession, but if they say that the light on the object changed at a certain point, well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to ask them a different question to see if that statement of fact is the same as they just told me a half hour ago. So generally, they take about an hour, the interviews. And I want to go back and see if they're changed. Maybe, and if you pick up on certain things, kind of gives you a clue whether they're just embellishing or whether they're don't really honestly remember everything. Hey, if you don't remember, just don't you don't have to tell me. Just say you don't remember. It's better that you just tell me you don't remember versus trying to make something up to make the story better. And sometimes you get people that will change their story, and then and maybe this is not as, it's a little suspect, and it helps you come to your conclusion,
Right. So you're basically reframing the questions to get the same point, but if they come back with different points, then that sort of is a red flag, perhaps? Yeah,
right. Exactly. I think it would be the same as if when your kids are young and they wanted to go out and, your sons want to go out and you want to know where they were the next morning. You just, hey, where did you guys go last night? And they tell you. And then a little while later, you ask them, so who, if they told you I was with Bill and Joe, and then later on an hour later, you ask them, so who was there again? And see if they tell you the same thing.
Yeah, we've all done that.
Uncle Bill and Joe, or whatever they say. That's just, if someone is telling you something and they're making it up as they go along because they're trying to they're trying to give you the information that they think you want, there's a likelihood that it's going to change. Someone that you don't have to have a good memory to tell the truth. And so when somebody fudges that basic information up, then you know that there's, so something's going on, and then you want to kind of check a little bit more with them. And so there's a difference between interrogation and an interview. And so an interview requires a different approach. And sometimes I go to a little bit aggressive if I'm doing things, which I try not to do. It's just a fallback. An interview takes, what you guys do is an interview, and it takes a certain kind of finesse. It takes because you allow people to talk and you listen, where if you're trying to gather information, you want it to be of a specific kind and you want it to be the same every time they tell it to you.
Will there be sort of like with your sort of background in law enforcement, and we've all sort of seen the programs and sort of stuff like that, and they say you can get a lot of information through body posturing and language when you're talking to someone and interviewing someone as to give you clues of what they're perhaps saying is true or not. You hear often vague references that if someone tells a lie, they won't actually look at you and directly in the eye and stuff like that. I mean, do you use those sort of techniques as well?
So in the bigger police departments, there are people that actually they train and they have people that train that type of when you're doing an interview or interrogation. There are cues, like you're saying, to look for in someone. And they train people to do that. They try, overall, in the police academies, they give you a basic understanding of what you look for, facial expressions and things like that. Mm-hmm. Eye cues, people that flutter their eyes, people that look away, the changing of the brow up top, the thickening of the eyebrow up top, people that giggle a lot, like when you talk to them. If you ever notice on some of these UFO programs, I'm going to talk mostly radio. There are obvious cues when you're talking to somebody in person, and these MUFON ones are generally all done remotely. So, but people that giggle a lot, they'll be telling their story and then they start giggling. And you know how the Chinese always say that's the fool in a person. That's the fool coming out, the liar coming out, and that's what it is. Anybody that giggles all the time while they're trying to talk, it's a nervous reaction to. They know that what they're telling you is BS, but they're hoping that you don't buy it as BS. But it makes them nervous. Yeah, there are clues like that you for sure would look for, but you need to be physically there, of course.
That's interesting. Fluttering the eyelids. Yes, I don't get many girls do that to me anyway, so that probably doesn't mean anything.
Oh boy!
Oh, he's a silly sausage, isn't he?
Stop giggling.
Oh dear. It's a tricky one, isn't it, when you're dealing with personal accounts? I find it is very tricky, particularly if it sounds so fantastical. What they're telling you, and also a lot of it's down to their own belief system of how they've interpreted what's happened or how they've perceived the situation. And sometimes it's getting past the jargon of how they're explaining it because of their perception of it, they may put it in a way that sounds crazy, but it actually is quite logical when you break it down to, but it could have been, if you put it in this term, it makes more sense. But it's the same thing. It's just a different way of putting it.
Right. And so the reason why hearsay is, I'm sure it's illegal. It's not accepted in trial courts in the UK. Also, it's not accepted in the United States. Is because it's exactly what it is, just hearsay. People are just telling you secondhand information, different information. When you're interviewing somebody, you're supposing that you're getting the firsthand information from that person, but as you said, their perception of what they saw could be skewed. It could be skewed over time. The duration of the incident could, and the embellishment, it may not be done on purpose, but they want so much to tell somebody else what they saw that they sensationalize things a little bit. And you have to be careful with people like that, because then you know everything becomes suspect after that. If they're willing to make things up, if they're willing to add things to the story that shouldn't be, even in omitting things that they shouldn't omit. But personal accounts, and they change over time, and you see that all the time also. And I think I used Travis Walton as an example. Over time, his story, and I've heard him speak several times, and I've met him, and he's changed. The basics of it have remained the same. The incident's the same, but he's added things, he's changed things. I don't, and to me that kind of, it shoots your credibility down a little bit when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
How long have you been doing the UFO investigations for?
I think 2016 I became a field investigator. So going on about 5 years now.
Have you noticed a sort of similar trend to the cases? So if someone says like they were abducted, do they all sound similar in the stories for different cases? Like for example, with us with the poltergeists, for example, there's almost like a set itinerary to how it all plays out. Is that the same with the UFO cases?
Right. So I would say the ones that were reported way back, like the Socorro incident back in New Mexico, where he said that he came in contact with beings that landed in the desert. He was a police officer. Those original ones were, on the face of them, they were believable. Why would this police officer lie? Now, jump to present time, where you see it's a certain type of craft. It's a certain type of humanoid. They all have 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 eyes. They're either gray or green. They maybe introduce a few different, their varieties in, but yeah, I mean it's always at night, or after I went to bed type thing, and I woke up and I was disoriented, or later in the day I started getting bombarded with these thoughts and these visions, and so I knew something happened, and that's the way a lot of these cases develop over time. And I think that if you look at the fact that these are, the way I said it to someone who asked me one day is, I said, we look at things as human beings. We try to project what we are on, even our animals, like our dogs. My dog is so smart. He's a dog. He may be smart for a dog. He might be smarter than your other dog, but he's still just a dog. He doesn't have that human element to him, as far as he's not a human being. He doesn't have that way of thinking. He's not intelligent like a human being. Well, we can't, in order to be honest, we have to assume that these beings from other planets, from other dimensions, wherever they're coming from, we might not even know what they are. We might not even recognize them as life forms. We're putting a human element into them. 4 limbs, 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 eyes, ears, mouth. But we don't even know if they're carbon based. We don't know if we have no idea what they would be. They could be walking amongst us, and we would have no idea, because we wouldn't even be able to identify their technology. They'd be that far. If they could get here, if they could find Earth and get here, whether it be nuts and bolts flying, bending space and time, or creating a portal in an interdimensional a multiverse, we might not even understand what these creatures are. We might even identify them as living beings, let alone it's too much of a coincidence that all these things are biologically similar.
Yeah, so. I've noticed that. I mean, I'm a big Star Trek fan, and it makes you think. It makes you think about life forms outside the box.
Yes.
Because there's episodes where they have life forms and they're not carbon based.
Right.
And there's just so many different races out there, and obviously, you can put that into real life as well, because you don't, as you said, you don't know whether they're going to be carbon based. I mean, okay, on Earth, everything's carbon based, but it might be, I don't know, lithium based on another planet.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And with Star Trek, how many bumps can you put on a costume on someone's head after a while? But and I think too is if we are thinking as in this instance as a human being, well, then the logical thing to expect is that we haven't sent anybody out past the moon since 1973, 70, but we have sent out a lot of AI, a lot of robotics. Now, if space is the problem, if distance is the problem, and lifespan is the problem, well, then it would be logical that any other technologically advanced civilization, I'm talking relatively the same as us, because there might be life that's advanced 10,000, 100,000 years more than we have. The universe is so much older than we are, but you would think that they would send out robotics, maybe self-replicating AI robotics that could go to planets, moons, asteroids, recreate themselves, send them out again. So they might not even reflect what the original creators looked like. They just might have developed into these, like, what is that movie that has those robots that are fighting wars on Earth? I know you guys know what I'm talking about, but those, they come from a planet where they're robots, but they're living robots that wherever they're from, they're made of metal and they're made of these components, but they're alive. It's because that's where they're from. And I think that you have to be able to expand the theories on what these things are and where they're coming from, what they might be and what they might not be, versus the standard gray 4 foot tall alien and the green 5 foot tall alien, or the reptilian, that's the Queen and that's Hillary Clinton that they claim. You know what I mean?
This is the problem, though, isn't it, with the ufology world? It crosses so far into conspiracy theory. That, those two fields are so intertwined that but we've got this CIA redacted, document that says this, this, and this, and this, and you're like, so much of it is blacked out. How can you make sense of that for a start? And it blows my mind that people can try and read between the lines and come up with 20, you know what I mean? Like the lizard overlord kind of scenario. And this is the problem, isn't it? The conspiracy theory world that interacts with these theories that make it sound even more ludicrous, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think that's a major problem. And I think that goes back to the other position is that it generates money for someone. So if they see it as a money-making opportunity, well, they're going to seize that. And then they're going to continue those conspiracy theorists. And I think, they have the programs they have on TV, Ancient Aliens and all that stuff. I mean, really on the face of it, it's all conspiracy theory. I mean, that's really all it is. When the show originally came out in 2009 or whatever, it was pretty interesting. It was based on Von Daniken's books, but now it's morphed into this whole other thing. And it's just pure conjecture, and none of the facts are presented the way they should be. They don't give you an there's nobody that gives you an alternative to what they're saying. And
yeah, I mean, with Ancient Aliens, and I agree with you there, Chris. I mean, the first series was good. It was good TV, and then it just went to hell in a handbasket after that.
Well, I do think, there are aliens among us, personally. As I've said previously in other shows about octopus, they don't share any similar DNA to anything on the planet. But there's a theory going around it actually come out this year on the news and media and stuff. Scientists are now thinking that an octopus could be found on one of Jupiter's moons.
All right.
And it's been reported everywhere. BBC, Daily Mail, all the newspapers.
I do think that was another theory, though. I don't think...
Oh, yeah, it is another theory, because obviously we can't just nip over and have a look.
And that's another thing. I think when people sort of come up with these sort of theories, they always just put them just out of reach, don't they? They will put them somewhere where they know damn well we can't go and have a look.
But
you know.
the fact does remain that they don't share any common DNA with any of us, anything on the planet. We all have this common link, except octopus.
Oh, okay.
And they're really intelligent.
I've heard that before also, that it could have been some type of a DNA that hitched a ride on a comet or asteroid during the bombardment period. But who knows? I mean, who knows if evolution is a... you're taking how many percentages of the species that once lived on this planet have been, are extinct or eradicated through disasters. And I think during, 80% of the first and then 80% of what was left over. And I don't know, there's just a tremendous, so this planet probably flourished with different types of life that maybe the octopus are the last ones left of that type of species. But I think there's life everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely believe there's life out there. I mean, even if it is just microbial, microbes and stuff.
It's the travelling part that gets me.
Oh, they travel on Halley's Comet. It comes around every 76 years, and they just jump on the other side of the solar system, and then they hit your ride here because they've all seen the postcards from Earth.
Wait a second, wasn't Narubu supposed to arrive back in 2012, and then that guy McMasters or whatever his name is changed the date because he said he calculated something wrong, and people were building bunkers and MREs in their kitchens. They were hiding them. And
there is something I did want to touch on, Chris. You've been doing a bit of research, which I spoke to you when I spoke to you the other day, and I just wondered if you'd like to sort of share what you're sort of working on, because it's led you to travelling both sides of the Atlantic and trying to put a few dots together. Would you mind sort of elaborating on that?
No, so this was I carry Brandon Shea.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so he and I, had come across one other once in a while in a group that we belonged to. It was a tongue-in-cheek podcast that had been out for many years, and there was a handful of people that were pretty much dedicated to listening to it. And they had a Facebook group people would share, just little snippets and jokes. And he and his wife have their own paranormal show, and he's like you guys. He's very good. Very good at interviewing, and I don't have the voice. He laughs because I say I sound like Joey Bag of Donuts out of Brooklyn compared to you guys who speak so nicely. I told Richard the other day after I spoke to him, my daughter, I had to go to her apartment to fix something for her, and then she needed groceries, so I took her, and I told her I spoke to him. She's like, "Did you let him speak at all?" But so he had gotten in touch with me. I guess it was a little over a month ago, and he was looking into something through more of a paranormal eye, but he wanted to get an idea of it through the UFO/UAV field. And so he told me what he was looking at, different paranormal stuff taking place in a few states in the Midwest. And so I have access to different reports, different data, a whole bunch of different things. So I started to look into it with him, and there seems to be a correlation in certain places between, it's kind of grown on its own. So different types of UAV and EBE contact or sightings and different areas of the states and different corporations and leaps in technology, sometimes corporate wealth, mergers, acquisitions. So one of the companies I was looking at, I remember coming across some things about Southern England. And I have a bunch of old books that I read. I like to go back. My master's degree is in history, and so I always believe that you want to go contemporary when you are learning about anything, World War I, II, anything historical. You want to go back to the people that wrote it then, because that's when you're going to get the objective, the facts. Everything's going to be clearer versus buying something that was authored 40 years later. So I went back to some of these older books I have. Saw there was a lot of reports in the 40s in that area and in that part of England. And so when I finally started printing some of the stuff out in the Berkshires, there's a tremendous amount of stuff. I can just tell you a few of the counties here that I looked at, including Berkshire, Wiltshire, Hampshire, Oxfordshire, Surrey, if I'm pronouncing them right, Bracknell. All these areas have these sightings that are around some of these large corporations, Dow Union, which was Union Carbide, and I don't, I'm not sure, and so I didn't really understand the paranormal aspect of things till recently, because I got to play ignorant, and I always just saw ghosts and spirits, and I just don't know anything about that. I don't, know about ghosts, and I don't know about dead people coming around in spirit form. So I asked him, I said, is that what that part of paranormal is? And then he explained it to me, and then I talked to Richard, who explained it almost the exact same way. That the whole it could be multiverses and the crossovers and time that was in the past, we're just crossing over, and that's what we're witnessing type stuff. And so I said to him, maybe some of these sightings and these interaction with these beings are that type of paranormal, and associated with activities so these people, some of these beings are saying they're benevolent and they're here to help us as a human race. And maybe that's their reason. Maybe it's not nefarious. Maybe they are here to watch and to help and to see. I know a lot of this stuff started happening after Oak Ridge, which was the atom bomb, the Manhattan Project. Now, if there are agents of other worlds trying to help or persuade governments into creating weapons of destruction or other things, what if these other beings are here to oversee, to make sure that does not happen? So kind of a counterbalance to it. And it's just very interesting. The more that I look at it, the more that he looks at it, it's really just in its infancy, because the amount of information and the amount of data is just so vast. I can sit for 2 hours and I'll print out 20, 30 pages of sightings in one state in a couple of different counties. And I sit for 2 hours and highlight through cross-referencing through sighting areas by town, city, or whatever, off the list that I'm making for that particular county. And then you sit back and you look at it and you're like, wow, how much can you attribute to coincidence versus maybe there is something going on here, that we need to really take a look at. Do I think these beings are coming from other planets? I don't really. At one point, maybe a long time ago, I would kind of, that's a kind of a fantasy, but and if you have to accept that, then you have to accept that there's an ability to bend space and time and create wormholes so that travel is immediate. But what if these craft and these beings are from a different universe? If there's multiverses and they have a way of manipulating the vibration or the elemental vibration and creating a hole in that universe, and they can cross over. They've already identified where they're going. It's not like they have to search through the vastness of space to find a planet that has intelligent life and then try to get there. They have other ways. Maybe they have a way of almost setting up a television set and being able to look through these multiverses to see what they want. I don't know, but it's all very interesting, I think. And I wouldn't have ever really ventured into anything, the paranormal. The only ever paranormal that I was involved with, that I ever heard about, I should say, my great aunt who did the UFO stuff and everything when I was a kid. She used to use she read Edgar Cayce. She used the Ouija board a lot, and it created a lot of problems. And the Roman Catholics and my aunts would get upset, and she would tell them, "Listen, if God's all powerful, who are we to restrict with an all powerful, all creating God? He can do anything he wants in the universe. So to not accept that there are other things going on is to limit God's power." And then she started to use the Ouija board, and it was directing her what to do. I was a child, but she and I found out some of these things much later, and they were very reluctant to talk about it, not because they didn't believe it, but because they were scared to. They didn't want to, because what had happened with her was very upsetting with that Ouija board and everything. So I don't know, a lot of interesting things though.
I definitely kind of lean more to the multidimensional side of things, more than aliens coming from another planet millions of light years away and picking somebody up and doing some tests on them and then putting them back down again, or mutilating the odd cow.
Let's face it, if we could travel to another alien planet, we would be doing exactly the same thing. We'd be picking them up, testing them, having a look at them anatomy-wise. We'd be probing them and all sorts. We'd be doing exactly the same things what they do.
I don't disagree, but there's a long period of time they've done that for. You would think by now they would have completed that testing stage. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, there is that. But also, another thing I was thinking of, in the paranormal field, we've encountered and heard so many stories about time slips.
Yeah.
Going from one time to another. Now, if it takes an alien spacecraft 50 million years to travel across the space and arrive in our future, who's to say they can't manipulate a space, a time tunnel type thing?
Well, yeah, otherwise they really would be ancient aliens by the time they got here, wouldn't they?
Exactly. They could open up a time fracture, because we know that there's been thousands of reports of these time fractures all over the planet. Who's to say that they can't manipulate that and get into it, and then they just, from our point of view, they're already here, or they've already encountered the Egyptians and stuff like that, and even now.
But we don't know, do we? And this is the thing. But it's interesting what Chris is saying about the clusters of, like when you start correlating data, it's starting to sound to me that what was experienced, say, what John Keel experienced in the Mothman prophecies, there was a cluster focused on a specific area that culminated in a disaster, but there was a lot of paranormal activity, what would be classed as paranormal activity, going on at the same time, alongside all this ufology and alien encounter stuff that was going on at the same time. So and this is something we hear of time and time again, don't we, when we talk about, there was a poltergeist case, but then there was ufology case, UFO sightings and stuff like that going on at the same time. So,
and also it sort of, you said about the cluster, that another thing that springs to mind is the missing 411.
Yeah, Chris, have you heard of that?
Yeah, so I had spoken to David Paulides a few times. He's a retired cop from out in California, and he just presents his data. That's really all he does. he doesn't come to any conclusions. He allows people just to take what he's offering and then come to their own conclusions. Some people say he's a he investigates Bigfoot. He investigates a lot of things, but he doesn't say Bigfoot took them. He doesn't say he just purely statistical, purely the problems that he's encountered with the National Forest Service trying to get the statistics on the amount of people that have gone missing. And he's run into tremendous problems and tremendous costs because they want him to pay for a lot of that stuff. But that's another thing, though, with the 411 is people try to say that, well, there's these vortexes in the earth and these people are getting sucked in. And there's no other place on earth that happens. So why are we to suppose that that's just taking place in these specific areas and that people are walking through portals and vanishing? When maybe it's just, hey, I'm out. The United States is vast. I mean, it takes me 14 hours just to drive from South Carolina, where I live in the northern part of South Carolina, just to get to the southern part of New York, where I used to live. And that's only crossing about 3 states. To get to California would take me about 4 days to drive there. So, and there's vast areas that have never been that have never been explored, wilderness, desert. And so who's to say these people are just not going out and getting lost, getting disoriented and lost? They think that they go out with a backpack on and they're walking around and they're getting lost.
What makes it more interesting is because some of the cases that Paul Pilates looked into was that of hunters. People that do this thing on a regular basis, they go out hunting, they know the land, and they've got the really good survival skills and stuff, but they still tend to go missing without a trace. And some of them happen to 2-year-old children as well.
The children, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so there are obviously cases where you could quite easily say, you could disappear without a trace, that's fine. But there are others that you think, well, there's something a little bit more going on there, especially with the 2-year-old, and then he was found 400 miles west of where he disappeared in a space of a day. It just throws up so many different theories, but no one's really going to know what happened.
No, but you build up bodies of evidence, don't you? And that's what you have to do with each of these. You have to build up bodies of evidence and data, going back to data. And I know that bit's the boring bit of the job, but that's that's where answers lie, because patterns and evidence come from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think no one's going to really conclude the missing 411 unless someone comes forward and goes, well, actually, I did it. Here's my evidence.
Yeah.
I think it's just going to be one of those things.
Some of the problems we fall into, particularly living here in the UK, and it's something I want to pick up on something like Chris sort of said. I've been fortunate enough to I lived in Australia for 9 years, and that is a vast continental landmass, and it does take a bit of getting your head around how big these places are when you come from the UK, where everything is accessible. You can travel from one end of the country to the other in about 8 hours on a good day.
Yeah, it's true. No, that's true. It's very hard to get the vastness of America. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? In our very little country, we are very small, quite frankly.
And you still get people moaning that Scotland's too far.
Yeah, we have a state park that's not too far from me. It's called Sumter National Forest, and it's between Long Creek, which is in Oconee County where I live, and then you go across through Sumter National Forest and down into Raven Gap, Georgia, and it doesn't look big when you're crossing through it, but if you were to get out of your car and walk in there, it's huge. And we had that down here. That's what people do, is they hunt, and they hunt in these areas. But if you go into these forests and you become disoriented, and even though it's maybe 8 square mile forest, you can easily become so lost in there
Yeah.
You run out of food, you run out of potable water, you run out of everything else, and you're finished. And there's no cell phone signals in some of these areas. You get lost, and then maybe they find you later, maybe they don't find you later, And we have coyotes, we have wild animals all around here. It's they devour things to the bone. What do they have? Animals that actually will chew through bone. I mean, possums. We have possums all over the place. They eat bone and marrow, and so when scavenging time's over and there's nothing left, well, then you have a disappeared person. And with the children, the difference between children and adults is as a child. I could see a child will generally sit and wait for somebody to get them. Children are not found very far away, but they're found in odd places. They're found, a mile up a hill or 2 miles down a slope. But they generally stay where they are because they're scared and they think mom or dad or whoever's going to come and get them. But an adult, a teenager, an adult will wander because they want to find their way out. And once you get deeper into some of these places, you're finished. You're lost. And I think that's, I'm not going to say all of them that's the conclusion, but I would say a great deal of them are just people going out and they're pompous. They think that they have backpack on. They've done it before, and they wind up getting lost.
And even the most experienced hunter can get lost.
Yes, exactly.
You shouldn't sort of look on that as saying, well, this is proof positive that there must be something going on because he's been hunting for 30 years in roughly the same area,
Right.
It's quite possible that they can get lost.
I'm not saying that there's a logical explanation. There isn't a logical explanation for any of them, because I totally believe there is. But when it comes to the little child, 3-year-old, found 300 miles away from where he went missing, I think his remains were found 300 miles away. I mean, it's a bit hard to make that logical,
But I suppose you can't rule out, and I suppose if you presented that to Chris when he was in the force, and you would automatically assume there's foul play involved.
Or abduction,
right.
You think abduction, wouldn't you? And I'm not talking alien abduction here, I'm talking human abduction.
No. Right, that would be your first. That would be your first step. Is to. But
this
to
is
see
like, I think this is like a cold case because nothing's ever been found in that respect. And obviously, the law enforcement agencies, there was loads of them involved. Even the FBI turned up to one of them for some reason. That sort of doesn't make much logic because apparently they don't. I mean, you can probably clarify that whether or not they actually attend missing children cases.
Well, if it's the FBI's any abduction is a federal crime.
But missing children.
Yeah. Well, if it's suspected to be an abduction, the FBI will get involved. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And if it's a missing child, if it's a missing child, your first inclination is that it's an abduction because you want to try to find them, and you're just going to presume that somebody's taken them. It's not if it's not a logical loss. Like some children will go out and wander around and fall in a sinkhole or in a in an old septic pipe or something. But you would know that. But if they're just gone, you would eventually the FBI would get involved.
Yeah.
So coming into the last stretch of the show, what case have you come across personally, Chris, that you find or have found to be the most credible that you've dealt with? Now there's a question on the table, isn't it?
Yeah. I think I'd have to go back to a couple of the. I think any that I find credible are old cases. So I would go back to Captain Mantell in 1947 when they were dispatched over Gorman Airfield in Kentucky. They were out on a training mission. I think they were F-51s they were flying, and he had 2 wingmen, and so the Gorman Air Base had reported to them that there were some objects in his area that were flying, and they weren't flying the way the aircraft that we knew that we had at the time. So they dispatched him to go find them. So when they got to where these objects were, the wingman broke off he decided he was going to go after this object, and he wound up crashing, and he was killed. Then there was another one called Charles Whiten incident, and they were airline pilots, but they were also experienced World War II fighter pilots, and they were working for, I don't know if it was Eastern Airlines at the time, and they were flying, and an object, a cigar-shaped object, traversed the aircraft, and then they described this. And it wasn't just them, because when the plane landed and they gave their report, passengers on board the aircraft also reported this sighting. And then the Socorro incident in New Mexico, Ronnie Socorro, the police officer who, he was just on routine patrol and he was chasing a speeder, and he caught out of the corner of his eye what he thought was an overturned truck. So he broke off his pursuit of the speeding vehicle, and he went up and he investigated, and that's where he saw that little craft had landed. He reported the couple of beings around the craft, and I think more could have came out of that incident than any other incident in UFO history. But I think he was persuaded to keep quiet. He was told by his superiors. At first they were pretty engaging, but then they told him to kind of, you shouldn't really be speaking too much of this. And he thought it was just for job preservation. But then there were people from the Air Force that came down, and the federal government came down, and he wound up resigning from his job a few years later because he had been met with such ridicule. And that's the other thing. When you do have people that offer credible sightings, credible evidence, they're often put down, and they're often made to feel stupid, and so they don't want to. There's a hesitancy to reporting and going further with it, and there's a kind of self-preservation in mind. But I think those are some of the more credible. And I have to say, Travis Walton, the original Travis Walton story, as it was when he first reported it, has a lot of validity to it. It's just that he changed it in the end, and I think that kind of ruined it for him, as far as trying to reach a whole bunch of people. But his original story, as told, as reported by his family, his friends, the police officers that were there, everything, something happened. I don't think there's any doubt that something happened. Just wish he would just keep it that way.
That's before he made a career out of becoming Travis Walton.
That's before he made a career out of Hollywood and books and conferences and speaking engagements, and absolutely.
You have to keep the ball rolling somehow, don't you?
I think the problem though with this is, like, you have an encounter like that, you become famous for that encounter, so you get a job. Try and get a job. Who are you? Oh, I'm Travis Walton. Do you know what I mean? Oh, you're the guy that had that experience in the woods. Do you know what I mean? It's like, his name is always now linked to that, so he's got to make money somehow, so I suppose make it out of that. So it becomes tainted, doesn't it, because of the connotations to the case originally. And like you say, you're going to have to keep people interested because that's where your money's coming from. Yeah. So it does. Right. Mm-hmm. It is a double-edged sword. If he was wandering around for the last God knows how many years saying exactly the same story, people go, "Oh, it's a bit boring. I've seen him before." Yawn. So to be fair to Travis, I've not been lucky enough to speak to him, but from going back to the original encounter, he becomes tainted by that encounter as somebody who's had an experience that kind of now makes him a bit weird. Would you employ somebody like that in a normal job again?
The prime example, I know going back to movies and stuff, but the prime example of that is the guy on Independence Day. The crop, that does the crop spraying.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
It becomes a drunk. He's because of the experience he had, I suppose. Yeah, I can see where you're going with that thought. Weirdly, I can actually see the link there, Paul.
Yeah, it's true.
I'm back.
It's true.
He had the last laugh.
Yeah, he did.
It is one of the strangest areas I have to say, is the ufology world. I find it one of the strangest areas to look at and try and work out some kind of theory. I find that harder than I do the paranormal field. The paranormal field, I can look at it from various different angles, but I find the ufology world a lot harder because you are generally talking to people that feel that they've had a nuts and bolts encounter of something that was actually physically real. Whereas at least with the paranormal field of ghosts and spirits, it's an incorporeal being. Do you know what I mean? It's something
Right.
that, that you can't record in any way specifically. So it is very difficult because you haven't got the physical evidence to back it up with, but there should be if it was a nuts and bolts experience. And this is the problem I have with this field in general. And cryptozoology, I cross into this as well, because if it was a real live and kicking animal, like Bigfoot or something, surely there would be some physical evidence by now of scat or hair or something that we could have got to prove the existence of said animal or thing. You know what I mean?
There's thousands of species that are being discovered every day. So,
well, this is the argument that our lovely Jane Lynch talks about as well. But it is a fascinating field, and it is important to have a body of people that are prepared to go out and investigate and talk to these people and record them. And like Chris says, just their encounter, just their experience of that. It's really important. And to cross-reference with things like flight pans and cosmic influences and, moon phases and, satellite encounters and all that sort of stuff. So you can try to sort the wheat from the chaff on this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It is really important to do that because at the end of the day, you can't discount one area of the paranormal. It's unexplained. Somebody's had an encounter that they can't explain. Yes, we can look at it from different angles, like the psychological and the physical evidence and the cosmological and the meteorological and all those other factors. We can do that on the paranormal field as much as we can in the ufology field, but it basically boils down to somebody's had an experience they can't explain, and it's important to record that, cross off as many boxes as we can on that, but if we still can't explain it, then something happened. We don't know what it is. It may well come to light.
Right. So the way I look at it is, when I was a cop, my philosophy in police work was, if it was important enough for someone, something happened to them and it was important enough for them to call the police to ask for help, because you're inviting police to your house. It's an imposition to almost everybody to have a cop around. But if it was important enough for them to call, no matter on the face of it how silly I thought it might have been, or how whatever, I treated it as though it was important when I got to them, because it was important to them. So I treated it as just as important, and just did my best to listen and to help in any way I could. And that's what the UFO field, that's the way I approach it. I read their statements, I call them, and I engage them in a conversation, and I treat it as though, it's important to them. They don't want to be called a liar. They don't want to be, you're a phony, you're a fraud, you don't know what you made a big mistake. You just treat it like it's important, because that's the way they saw it. And it's just respect, and everybody's they're entitled to that respect. And then you offer a conclusion. And if they want to accept it, they do. If they don't, well, then they're free to continue to believe that whatever they choose to. But, that's just the philosophy I carry over.
And that's a really great philosophy that everybody should be having in this whole field. Respect for each other.
Yep, because it's important. It's important to you, and it's important to them. So,
out of everyone that you've investigated, has anyone actually said that they've had a visit by the Men in Black?
No, nobody yet. And so I was joking with Brendan. I said, the more that we start looking at this stuff, I said, I'm telling you, we might have the Men in Black showing up. And maybe the black-eyed kids. Who knows?
Yeah, might be lucky enough.
Yeah, but I don't know. They'd have to find my house first.
Well, if you ever do get flashy thinged, our podcast goes out on YouTube as well, I think. Just to remind you.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Flashy thinged. I'm sure there must be a more technical term for that.
Oh boy.
On that note, we have actually come to the end of the show. What a fascinating discussion. And actually a very sensible discussion in the batty world of ufology that it can often turn into. So thank you so much, Chris, for joining us tonight. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. Really enjoyed it.
I appreciate the invitation. I really do. And I hope I didn't talk too much. I hope I gave you guys a chance to at least speak a little bit. But I enjoyed it. I really did.
Yeah,
it was great.
It was good.
Yeah, really, really enjoyed it. Right, my beautiful boys. It's time to say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
For businesses around the world, today isn't a restart, it's a rethink. That's why they're partnering with IBM. Retailers are keeping their systems up as millions of orders move online. Call centers are using IBM Watson to manage customer questions with AI. And solutions built on the IBM cloud are helping patients receive trusted information. Today, we're rethinking how business moves forwards. Let's put smart to work. Visit ibm.com/smart/UK to learn more.
If you're unemployed or your income has reduced, you may be able to get financial support from the government. Universal credit and other benefits could support you if you've lost your job, or you're still working but earning less than usual. To find out more, search online for employment and benefits help. Eligibility criteria apply.